Muito boa tarde, bem-vindos. Como é habitual, antes de começarmos, vamos passar os vídeos dos nossos patrocinadores. É muito breve, mas pedia-vos um minuto da vossa atenção. Muito obrigado.
Boa tarde a todos. Bem-vindos a esta quarta sessão do ciclo de conferências 5 continentes, não é? 5 continentes, 5 arquitetos, 5 continentes. Thanks very much to Lee for coming here. It's a pleasure and surely an honor. Thank you. And I'm just going to say some words in Portuguese, if you don't mind, and then you'll be properly presented by my colleagues, okay? Portanto, mais uma vez, boa tarde. Queria agradecer a vossa presença, também aos patrocinadores, aos apoios institucionais que temos. Claro que também aos meus colegas Ana, Neiva e José Júlio, que são o motor desta organização. Mas estamos na quarta sessão. Ainda falta uma, mas ainda assim, em jeito de balanço, eu gostava de sublinhar duas coisas, que é, por um lado, a presença assinalável de estudantes desta faculdade, que muito me apraz. Realmente, das melhores coisas que temos tido, e falo ainda do nosso tempo também, foi sempre a possibilidade de assistirmos a conferências que tiveram importância bastante na nossa formação. Portanto, é muito bom vê-los aqui. E também uma palavra especial para os patrocinadores deste evento, que de facto se posicionam face à faculdade e não só, também às realizações de caráter cultural de uma forma diferente, inovadora e, de facto, muito importante também para que as iniciativas levadas a cabo pela faculdade sejam uma realidade. Muito obrigado pelo vosso apoio inestimável. José. Passo então a palavra ao meu colega José Júlio Cabral Dias.
Dear all, welcome to our lecture series today with the Chinese architect Xiaodong. And thank you for coming. My colleague will introduce our guest, though I would like also to thank Mr. Xiaodong for accepting our invitation and being here today. Thank you very much. You are very welcome. Thank you indeed. I will now speak in Portuguese for expressing our gratitude to our sponsors, due to both their support and commitment with this series. À semelhança do que temos feito, desejamos mais uma vez agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores e parceiros institucionais, não só pelo apoio, mas também pelo entusiasmo com que se envolveram nesta iniciativa, superando largamente aquilo que poderia ser apenas um compromisso profissional, tornando-se numa verdadeira relação pessoal que muito nos enriqueceu desde a primeira sessão. Muito obrigado também por isso. Em concreto, queremos agradecer à Jofebar Panoramaah, em primeiro lugar, ao Sr. Engenheiro Tavares Nunes, mas também ao arquiteto Pedro Borges Araújo e à responsável de marketing e comunicação da empresa, a arquiteta Ana Fernandes, e também, naturalmente, a todos os elementos da Jofebar que nos têm acompanhado, o Tiago, o Pedro e o Cláudio. Queremos também agradecer à Traço de Luz e ao seu administrador, Dr. João Becatel, bem como à responsável de comunicação, a Dra. Joana, a arquiteta. Não me ouvem? Bem como a responsável de comunicação, a arquiteta Joana Canas Martes, à Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, na pessoa do seu presidente, Sr. Professor Vasco Rato, à Fundação Oriente, na pessoa do seu presidente, Sr. Dr. Carlos Mujardino, bem como à sua direção cultural, na pessoa da Sra. Dra. Isabel Carvalho. E desejamos também agradecer a todos os nossos convidados pela disponibilidade absoluta com que aceitaram juntar-se a nós nesta iniciativa. E, por fim, queremos também dizer que a data da última conferência respeitante ao continente europeu, que, como sabem, teve marcada para dia 9 de fevereiro e foi adiada por razões de agenda do arquiteto David Chipperfield, será comunicada assim que seja oportuno e seja possível também. Mais uma vez, obrigado e muito bem-vindos.
Well, I will briefly introduce Ms. Xiaodong. Mr. Sorry. Well, dear students, guests, colleagues, sponsors, good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us to warmly welcome Mr. Li Xiaodong from China. We are very grateful for the opportunity and pleasure to introduce him to our school. I have got familiar with the work of Li Xiaodong in 2014 in a group exhibition held at Royal Academy of Arts in London entitled Sensing Spaces, Architecture Reimagined. The 7 invited architects, including our masters Álvaro Siza and Eduardo Soutomora, proposed site-specific installations that enhanced and explored fundamental elements of space in a conversation on the experiential qualities of architecture. In that exhibition, Li built a giant labyrinth made out of wooden branches and a contrasting brightly white floor that conducted the visitors throughout an oriental ambience until a surprising Zen garden of stone, floor, and mirrored walls. In his words, turning blindness into vision. This immersive spatial experience emphasized the contrast between the natural and the artificial, the firewood material opposed to the museum galleries, and puts into evidence Li's ideas about the specificity of Chinese architecture. Quoting Li Xiaodong, "The Western tendency is to look at the world as a series of objects, while in China and the East, we tend not to differentiate between subject and object. So, Western architecture develops from perspective, with the building as an object to be looked at from without, while Chinese architecture develops from the idea that a building is something to be experienced from within." In the same year, Li Xiaodong won one of the major architectural prizes worldwide in the inaugural edition of Moriyama Reich International Prize with the Li One Library. This Canadian prize recognizes, and I will quote, "architect that is transformative, inspired, as well as inspiring, and that reflects the humanistic values of justice, respect, equality, and inclusivity." About Li's library, the selection jury highlighted, and I will quote again, "the modest yet powerful quality of the building that makes architecture from a deep understanding of place, materiality, form, and light." By mentioning these 2 events, we want to stress some of the bold features that deeply moved us to invite him as a representative of Asia continent in this lecture cycle. Born in Beijing in 1963, Li graduated from the School of Architecture at Tsinghua University and completed his PhD in the Netherlands in 1993. After it, and after working for some years in the Netherlands until 1997, when he got back to China to found Li Xiaodong Atelier. His small office practice focused on small, often self-initiated and self-funding projects, where the tradition, used as a weapon, as a concept, not as a form in the space, as per Li's own words, and the contemporary modes of expression are key aspects in the definition of a Chinese architecture identity stands for. Apart from major awards like the Architectural Review Emerging Architecture Award in 2009, that is one of the world's most popular and prestigious awards for young architects, and the 2010 Aga Khan Award, both for the Bridge School in Fujian Province, Li also won the UNESCO Jury Award for Innovation, the Great Places Award in US, and the Eurasia Gold Medals, just to mention some of them. But his activity goes far beyond that being a practitioner architect. He is a granted professor and researcher in Tsinghua University in Beijing, winner of Riba Tutus Prize and the honorary fellowship of AIA, the American Institute of Architects, in 2012. His architecture associates the spiritual exploration of ideas while the rational thinking, and is based on an ongoing investigation on the concepts underlying the spatial Chinese context, by trying to, and I will quote again, identify a more genuine contemporary Chinese architecture instead of superimposing ideas from the West onto China. Li Xiaodong rejects the architectural styles as limits to the unique and the creative. However, while valuing the connection between tradition and modernity, integrates the consolidated knowledge and inherited experience as a solid basis to solve new problems. Closing this presentation to give the stage to Mr. Li Xiaodong, I would simply like to recall the conversation about universalism and identity that took place last week in Casa de Arquitectura about Portuguese architecture, to try to set a bridge to the concerns that lead to the alignment of this lecture cycle. It's about a common ground between the local and the universal, preserving the ambition to be universalistic about key disciplinary topics without closing itself to the context, a concrete place, and culture. It's also to do with the way we share the understanding of identity, even when we are either from Porto, from Abidjan, from Brisbane, from Tucson, from Beijing, for example. So I want to end this short introduction with a statement of Li Xiaodong that's completely about identity. So I'll quote you last time. For me, identity is not formal. It's not iconic. Identity thing is more how we interpret the issue, the problems. It's a condition. Thank you to all, and especially thank you, Li. We are very grateful that you have accepted our invitation, and we want to thank you for the kindness of sharing your culture, your background, and your ideas on these themes. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Hello? Can you hear me at the back? Okay? Okay, wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Anna, for your introduction. And Thank you, Tiago, for the wonderful guidance of the trip. I had a wonderful day. Thank you all. I'm really great honored to be here. This is the first time to be in Porto. I've been to Portugal before, 15 years ago in Lisbon and Coimbra. But for Porto, this is the first time. I really enjoy your city. Everybody understands what is identity, but what I'm going to talk about identity is slightly different because not just about identity of ourselves, but also the understanding of what we do, how we define the identity of the project we are designing. And besides the introduction of myself from Anna, I also like to introduce myself, another version of myself, because I had a tremendous identity crisis in the early 1990s, last century, when I studied in Netherlands for 4 years. I did my PhD there, and then I worked in an office in Amsterdam, and then I suddenly realized that I don't understand what is my architecture, because as a Chinese with a background of a tremendous Chinese culture, and then exposed totally in a totally different culture in Netherlands, and then when you design something in Holland, you need to define who you are first, and before you understand what is your architecture. And that is how the identity of crisis started. And then I stopped practicing. I decided to go back to the academia. So I went to Singapore. I taught in Singapore for 8 years before I started practicing again. And that 8 years is an important period of time for me to be reflexive of myself. Who am I and what I'm supposed to be in the future and what is my architecture. And after 8 years, I feel I was ready because all my research and writings is on Chinese culture, contemporary Chinese culture, and architecture in Chinese society. And then I will talk a little bit more first on the metaphysical issues of what I mean by identity, and then I will use my work to elaborate more. We see the world differently. We grew up in different environments. We got different education, so we see the world differently. One example, the spider. You know, the spider find a particular location and set up a net and wait for the insects to come, right? And this is the one type of vision. Another type is the eagle. The vision of the eagle is quite wide and because he has very good eyesight. He could see things from kilometers away. And then he spot the thing, and then he can grasp his opportunity right away. And from the eye of the eagle, you can see things like this, because you are far and you are high, right? And the Western people looking at the world differently from the Chinese one, they realized this one when I studied in Netherlands. So in the Western philosophy, there's a subject, there's an object. So the subject look at the object in a particular way. So the object exists, the world exists because the existence of the subject, right? And so if you don't understand the object, you cut smaller pieces until you cut in the smaller molecule, right? That's how the Western people see the world. And one day, there's a phenomena like this, the horizon. When you see the horizon, it's not something you cut. The horizon exists always, they're always there because the human eyesight, right? Then they develop a phenomenology as experience of what you see, what you experience. For instance, when we see this boat, and different people will describe the boat from different angles. People studying material, they will describe the material as in timber, this boat is made of timber or made of glass or metal. It depends on the quality of the particular material. And then as a designer, you will describe this boat based on the shape, right? But there's another way to describe what the boat brought you as an experience from here to here and to here. And then the story is beyond the material or the physical object itself, right? And when we see this globe, it's a very popular shape in the natural world. And we don't ask questions about that. But if I ask you a question, why all the stars in the universe took the same shape as the grapes, then the question becomes Zen-like, right? Have you asked a question like that? I think people can understand the question very easily. But to answer that question, we need to see beyond what is a sphere, a globe, right? So what is the common quality of a globe is you have the largest volume, smallest surface. It's easy for protection. It's more efficient, right? So that's natural evolution told us that this is the best shape for object like this. For water, because for food, with water, it's easier to protect the contents with a smaller surface. Okay, easy to understand. And then we understand why the leaves took this kind of shape, because efficient transformation of energy from the solar energy to the growing energy of the trees, right? So largest surface, smallest quantity. And then I will show you some images to elaborate more on the cultural difference. This is the typical Chinese garden. This is the Chinese word, garden. And from the word, you can see there's a boundary, a wall boundary. And there's earth, top one, and there's water, and there's trees. So the words garden include all those elements. And among all those elements, there's an important element that is the corridor. And the corridor, they never go straight. From one point to another point, you have to detour. You go very slowly in a very long trip. And this is a very typical Chinese garden. But on the our neighbor, Japanese garden, you will see garden like this. It's very simple, very straightforward. Why the difference? You know, Japanese culture basically comes from China. But why come to garden? There's a difference. Yeah? The difference comes from the landscape. The Chinese landscape was represented by this mountain, Yellow Mountain. If you have ever been to China, you've probably heard about this mountain. Very beautiful. And the quality of this mountain is like this. You're looking from afar, close distance, they are very different. And from different season, they're very different. So somehow you have to experience the mountain from a movement, from a process. But in Japan, the landscape is represented by this kind of mountain because they're all volcanoes. You know, volcanoes shaped like this, right? Looking from afar, close distance, they look the same. So you don't need to bother to experience the whole process to understand the shape of the mountain. So the natural landscape inspired designers to design the artificial shapes, spaces, based on the natural landscape. So different culture look at the world differently, right? And this is, everybody knows, this is by Frank Lloyd Wright. But very few people know that this is the first bird's eye view representation of contemporary architects. Wright is the first one. So before Wright, the Western people see the world from the eyesight. They use perspectives, right? Which means you don't look from above to see the object. You don't do the representation of architecture from the bird's eye view. You look at all the images, the pictures from the West is like that. But in China, we never see the building or represent the building from the perspectives. We always raise up the bird's eye view because we never separate what is subject, what is object. We always see the world from the God's eye view. The God's eye view is the bird's eye view. The reason behind this one is because all the Chinese architecture, if you see you want to use perspective to represent that architecture, you only see the corner of the wall. You never see what is beyond, right? But with bird's eye view, you see everything. You see, it's about a complex. You see mountain behind the mountain, buildings behind buildings, yeah? Yes? Bird's eye view. For 2,000 years, all Chinese architecture are represented in this way. And so we can present a story, a long scroll. Probably you have seen this painting before. This painting is about 10 meters long. It's a story of a city on one same image. So the idea is like this. We see the world differently. We live our life differently. But why we built the same way now? That's a question I'm going to ask. This is China. We try very hard to be the same like any other countries, right? But when we look at China in close distance, we have a lot of problems. Because of the rapid urbanization, we lack of time to be reflexive on real issues. We used to build this way, very subtle. So building construction is a very serious matter. You have to choose the right time, right place, and to touch the ground in the right energy, not too much, not too small. But this is we live now. His name is Liang Qichao. He's the first Chinese who realized that China is simply another culture. So before him, every Chinese thought we are the center of the world. That is what China means, right? 中国, the center kingdom. And he went to Japan in the end of 19th century. He studied in Japan, and from Japan, he looked at China. Suddenly, he realized, China is simply another culture, because in Japan, it's already started the reform process of industrialization, and they already modernized somehow. So looking at Japan, from Japan to China, he realized suddenly, China is simply another culture. And he came home, trying to reform Chinese culture, but he failed. So we lost one opportunity in last century, in the beginning of last century. And then the second opportunity we got is the new China, established by the Communist Party. And then all those energies spending in the very beginning is to define what is contemporary Chinese, contemporary Chinese people. And you know that for the first 20 years of New China, there's a tremendous power used on the ideological definitions of what is Chinese like. And you have to rely on some particular ideas, right? You know what happens in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. This is during the Cultural Revolution. So China, people understand China as Mao's China. Mao is like at the beginning of the bottle. Everything have to go through a particular censorship, right? Are you familiar with this kind of image? Some yes, some no, right? Cultural Revolution, right? So this is so it's a very hustle and bustle turmoil of fighting, these hard working, but somehow. So after 20 years struggling of what is Chinese, it's like an old patient trying to recover. And I remember this when I went to university in 1979. There was an art exhibition in Beijing, and one of the paintings actually surprised everyone. So this image was one of the art exhibition. The real size of this is slightly smaller than this one, but similar size. Suddenly, reality was represented in front of everyone in a much larger scale. Before this one, yes, the images that you saw actually is pretending to be someone, right? But this one is reality exposed to a much larger scale. And then you feel, wow, is reality like this? So in the early 1980s, when we opened the door to the outside world, I remember it was a postmodern period in Europe, in America. And we haven't been through the even modernization process yet in China. So you can see what we feel by that time. Oh, we had a long culture, but when we open to the outside world, we are far behind. We are not a modernized society. We start to have TV, but there's no program. And the tremendous gap of knowledge between the generations, because during the Cultural Revolution time, there are 10 years gap of non-education whatsoever, stopped. And then our urban landscape is start to change. And nobody knows how, because we have so many patterns, examples outside China to copy, to learn, but which one is the correct one? Nobody knows. So demolishing and construction is probably the right words to describe what is happening in China for the last 40 years. And in the early 1980s, when we started reform, we don't have any examples, right? So the Chinese government invited IMPay, the international renowned Chinese architects, to design something to showcase to the Chinese architects what is supposed to be the right way to design, to build contemporary Chinese architecture. But Pei designed something like this. 77, I remember. Yeah, it's a Chinese architecture, but not really a modern or contemporary one. Yeah, it's a period of postmodern time. So when Pei presented this project to the government, they were very disappointed in the very beginning. They thought they are inviting Pei to design something contemporary, at the same time Chinese. But Pei designed something Chinese already, but not really contemporary. And especially the way Pei designed this building in a very iconic way. So the pitch roof, the white color, punctuated windows are very Chinese, and very iconic, picturesque, yeah? So after this, China went through almost like 2 decades of practicing based on the picturesque way of defining who we are, what is Chinese architecture. And this is one of the projects I was engaged in the early 1980s. And this is our graduation work, supervised by 2 professors from Tsinghua University. And when you see this image, you can't tell when this building was built. It could be 200 years ago, right? Very vernacular, very Chinese, but nothing modern, nothing contemporary. It's a hotel. And then it's like we are set in the trap of what is modern, what is the tradition, East or West. So architecture design is supposed to be something you can debate on. But now in our case in China, it's like a matter of choice. So you choose modern or traditional, West or East, yeah? So that's a trap we have been set up. It's like this. You pick up things and put them together. This is typical Chinese architecture in the 80s and early 90s. So you put up a roof recognizable as Chinese architecture, yeah? And you recognize this one, right? The World Expo in Shanghai, 2010, only 8 years ago. When you design something to represent China, it's not something you represent Singapore. China is a huge country and 1,000 years of history. And how can one particular building represent the whole culture? So it's tremendous crisis of identity. And when you look at the neighbor buildings like the British one, they are much more relaxed, okay? It's like you can put them away, right? It's very easy because they don't have this identity crisis. And those are the 10 most ugly architecture in China selected from website. So you know what we have been through. And then I will use one example to elaborate more by what I mean by identity. This is Singapore. And Singapore was founded in 1965, now 53 years old. And in the very beginning, Nobody knows what is Singaporean, right? Because it was a new built country. And mostly are Chinese, and then Indians, Malays, and some Caucasians. So when they build a new country, the first thing to do is to identify everyone with a particular ideas, right? Concept. So what they did is, first they built this one, a sculpture, marine line, a legend, okay? So we are the children of the marine line. It's like the Chinese are the children of the dragon. It's the same story. So you need to have this kind of legendary story to connect everyone together as one identity. And the second thing you do, you build your city, right? You don't know what to do. So they invited international renowned architects from all over the world to build the skyline of Singapore. You can see Kenzo Tangi, you can see Ampei, Sterling, everyone. And then one day, when the skyline is finished, they realized that it's like a mirage floating in the ocean, because none of these buildings is designed according to the island of Singapore. They do the building the same way they do in their hometown. And then the problem starts. What is the identity of Singapore? Because this skyline looks the same with Sydney, with Shanghai, with Tokyo, with every other countries, right? Is this the identity we talk about? Well, Zaha has an important position in history, no problem for that. Thinking out of the box, right? But if everyone Zaha designed in anywhere else in the world is the same identity of Zaha, it's not an identity of that project anymore, right? It's identity of the individual person. So it's not sustainable, because that's about last century. For me, I think last century is about styles, because you define your style, and then your clients approach you because they like your style. But for the 21st century, I think that everything is about sustainability. Everything is about lack of resource. We can't waste our energy to build a building based on the identity of the individual architects. But rather, you have to define the project properly, yeah? Okay, now an important historical debate based on what I just talked about is the post-colonial theoretical debate on center and the peripheries. The idea is like this. The Western countries, especially the British, the Dutch, the Germans, when they had technology, advancement of technology expanded territory, center and peripheries, right? Then the peripheries start to have tremendous problems with identity, because they are colonized somehow by the colonial power, and to define their own identity in a different way. And after the independence of those colonized society, they have tremendous issues to rebuild their identity, yeah? And this is what I talk about, issues about the center and the peripheries. The peripheries, the colonized society, they try to acquire the status of life of the centers. What they do is they copy. And if you copy, you will never become centers, right? That's very simple, because you never come on your own ideas. So, because you give up your own ideas, give up your own voice, you copy around, right? So the idea of to become center is to do independent thinking based on the understanding, definition of your own problems, yeah? This is how we become center. And then come back to Singapore. Singapore architects realized the problems of those international architects. They design the things the same way they do it in their hometown, so this mirage-like skyline. And then they start to debate on what is supposed to be the building for the tropical island. Well, living in the tropical island, you need to take care of the tropical issues. The tropical issue is very simple. The sun shading, cross ventilation, and take the rain away. I think the rain issue is the same with Portugal. So in Singapore, you have to design, you need to have sun shading device. you need to have the building more porous so the ventilation can be done easily. They start to design building like this. And this is the Aga Khan winter design project because of this detail. It's designed based on the monsoon season. When there's a rain, the wind can come in, but not the rain. So it's just because of design, the details. It's designed based on the lifestyle in the Singapore island. And they start to design like this. Like this. Porous, sun shading, ventilation. Even for the showers, you don't think it's very different, right? With or without rain, taking shower is the same thing. So they don't need to bother to have a roof. So Singapore now become the power of ideas in the Southeast Asian countries because they identify themselves clearly as a tropical urban lifestyle. The second example I'm going to elaborate is Hong Kong. You know, Hong Kong is a very small island. Peninsula is not island, but very small piece of land, but a lot of people. So they don't really need architects. Actually, developers bought piece of land, and you just pile up with the highest density as possible. It's like this. So you don't have space. That's why you have to be somehow multifunctional. So Hong Kong is like this. The dim sum, you like Chinese food. The dim sum is one particular type of Chinese food. Standardization, but allow varieties, right? Very healthy and very efficient. And another example is a friend of mine, Hong Kong architect, his apartment. Many, many years ago, this is his apartment. He was born here, and he still lives here now. He's like 56 years old. And that's a plan of his house. His own room, his parents, his two older sisters, the toilet, the kitchen. This is 4 by 8, 32 square meters. Tiny, right? And years later, all his family moved out. He owned the apartment himself. And then he started to think, wow, this is huge for one individual to own. So then he designed this one. A square, a street is like urban space. He was very happy. He occupied everything. And then one day he realized this is not the right way because if you never use two different functions at the same time, but the space is same, right? So he started to think differently. I should change, reconfigure the space based on different functions, right? This is what he did. So lighting effects different. The curtains move around differently. The sitting area, the bed. Daytime is like this, nighttime is like this. One person, you don't need the door for the bathroom, right? But it'll be awkward if you have a guest. And one day he changed it again. So this time is even more. I won't go to details about how this changed. You see the kitchen, the whole room is opened, the sitting area and the dining area, the movie session, the study, and the balcony, a group of friends gathering, guest room, game. That's a guy. And he's very happy about what he did. But I don't think he stayed in this apartment very often because he stayed in the hotel. This room is like his showroom because he has an office. So every time he has clients, he will show this room. It looks very happy. So both cases, Singapore and Hong Kong, you see the bridge linking what is the big issues, the identity of big issues, and then the individual project, right? That's what I'm talking about, identity. And this is a painting by my most favorite designers, the artist in China. It's very contemporary, and it's Chinese. He never intentionally to do something like that, but very naturally it comes around like that. Then I will use my project to elaborate more on what I understand about how I define the identity of the project. So the first one is in the remote, very poor area. It's a school project. This is the site. This is the sketch, right? And those are the neighbor buildings of the village, and at the foot of Snow Mountain, very beautiful Snow Mountain area. And we actually did fundraising as well for this project. So we have a very minimum budget, so we have to go very straightforward. And the plan is like, if you see the plan, it's never fanciful, right? It's never like a Zaha thing, you have to this, because the budget doesn't allow you to do anything fanciful, but straightforward. Earthquake resistant. So the beam, the steel bars, and the only defamiliarized object in this project is the staircases. And it's very costly if you order a new steel plate. So we actually found in the junkyard this plate. And so in the end, we had a new identity in the old community, which respect to each other, mostly local materials. See those neighbors' buildings, right? And the second project is the simulators, which is also the Okay, sorry for that. So when I want to see the site, it's like this. Here's the site. I was very scared. I mean, in this open wilderness of mountain food, I never got the experience to design anything like this, right? And you know that in Chinese theory, we had this idea of yin and the yang, right? This is a very young, energetic mountain. Very powerful magnet, you feel like that. And if you want to build something there, you have to build enough yin energy to balance the yang energy, right? And what is yin energy? Water, enclosure, yeah? Okay, so this is from the image of the Chinese artist. You see the building is actually playing around with the environment instead of dominating natural setting, right? It's always try to make a conversation, make a dialogue. So what I did is a lot of water surfaces, which is also beneficial for the local climatic conditions. An enclosure, so from every room you see water, you see the snow mountain. And not all, 95% local materials. I use very little concrete, because it's not really environmental friendly. So when you approach the building, it's like from below, you see the mountain first. And then when you surface, you see a very refined and elegant, a low profile artificial object. And then the mountain, you see the mountain now is less powerful as before, right? Because the water, the details, refinement details, lower down. It's like the French food. You use a big plate to present the food. The food looks much more elegant, right? It's the same way. So we use this particular details and surfaces to lower down the yang energy of the mountain. I don't like decorations because, you know, in front of nature, if you decorate your house, it's like you are not same competition. You are not competing natural beauty, right, with artificial one. So whatever you do, you're never going to compete. You never win. And then another project is in the Fujian province. In this project, I try to redefine the identity of the village, of the community. It's a very old community, and they used to build like this. This is, I think, the oldest typology of apartment building in the world. This is like hundreds of years old. And they used to stay in this kind of castles, but not anymore because the ventilation is not good. The reason they built this way is for protection, the safety issues. I've seen this before, right? In Fujian province, they have a lot of this, thousands of them. So I find this village is very interesting because it's really torn down. And because when they move out of the castles, they built everywhere. So there was no more public space. And when a community, there's no public space, there's no coherent power to put everybody together. So what I try in this project is to define a new identity for the village to rejuvenate the community. And this is before the intervention. It was like that. And this is how we see the world in the Chinese medication. So you see the human being as one complete body, and whatever happened to you develop an illness, right? It's because the circulation of energy is blocked somewhere. So the idea is to punctuate a particular point and to rejuvenate the energy flow. That's how we see the world. That's how we see the human body as well. And then, so I use the acupuncture approach in this case. This is the castle, and this is the acupuncture. So in the intervention of a particular architecture program, and see whether this particular program can rejuvenate the whole community. It's a bridge. It's a school, it's a library, and it's a performance stage for the puppet show. So connection is about everything. So this is the plan, very simple. This is the bridge, and that's the two schools. This is the library, and this is the suspended bridge linking the two sides of the stream. That's the finished project. It's also a playground for the children. You know the children between the years of 7 to 8 is the most energetic community of the whole village, right? So the most energetic body of the people in the center of the village is to try to rejuvenate the energy. After school, they want to hang around. They don't want to go home. And that's the performance stage for the puppet show. For ventilation. So we have a new identity because after this building was built, it become a tourist spot now. People visit this building. It's a very remote area, but somehow after the building was published, a lot of visitors come to the village. So they start to build a car park in the beginning of the village, and then restaurants, and then accommodation later on. So they changed the whole ideas about this village. Now they identify, the villagers identify themselves as the bridge school village, not the castle village anymore. The children are very happy because every now and then there are visitors, they ask them to pose for pictures. And now this project is another attempt to define a particular project. Again, in the remote area of, this is in Beijing. That's a village, again, very poor, but really distinguished about the materiality. And that's their materiality. I distinguished themselves from the others. They use the tree trunks, the twigs, to cook as well as to heat the house. So the idea is to give this particular texture or materiality to the project, to identify the project to that particular village, but not as a decoration, but rather as a function, as a program. 3 layers of tree trunks will provide sun shading and also filter of light going through the space. So it's a library. So you know when you read in the room, you don't want the light too strong, right? Right amount of light, but not too much. So this is the right amount of light coming into the space. And also, in this project is a particular design of how technology as a concept that is integrated with the design process, because we don't have any power supply for this project. So somehow, in summer, we have to design the building cool down naturally, not with air conditioning. And in winter, well, not heat up, but some. Oh, maybe? Okay. Okay. So this is how it works. So the location of the building is on the other side of the river, of the water. You know the temperature over the surface of water is much cooler, right? So the idea is to open up the entrance here. So there's a tunnel of ventilation, and the cool air over the surface of the water will be sucked in by the hot air from here, going inside, and then get out from here. So actually, you feel the cool air breathing through your face when you sit inside. And we tested, actually, the temperature inside is a similar temperature as in the shadow of the trees from outside. And in winter, it's the opposite. So we trap in the heat here, and then evaporate into the space inside. And the temperature inside is 5 degrees higher than outside. And we didn't do anything, no chemical treatment whatsoever with the facade, so that things can grow, and the birds can find their nest here as well. And then one day, it will disappear. It's become into a natural evaluation process. It's now like this, disappeared. If you go there to visit the library, it's like this. In winter, you can see this is totally blended into the natural setting. In Beijing, it's like this. In green, there's no color. It's this color. And then we use up all the money we get from the Hong Kong Foundation. There's no book yet. So we actually designed a process of getting the collection of the books by put up kind of a notes on the website. We're inviting people to come to visit this building and to donate books. If you donate 3 books, you can take 1 book away. So the idea is to make the library a platform of change of ideas. And in 2 months, we got all the collection, 7,000 books. And that's the winter. And this one is the new extension of our School of Architecture in Tsinghua University. This is the old building. We don't have any other site, so the site is only at the backyards. So it's nothing much you can do. It's a cube. That's the volume. And when you calculate about height limits, the distance in between, in end we have a perfect cube. And when it's a perfect cube, the idea is like, okay, maybe the Rubik box. You know Rubik box? Rubik cube. You play with that one. Rubik cube is like, we call it in Chinese like a magic cube. A magic cube like when the student join the school as knowing nothing about architecture, after 5 years education, you become architects, right? Magic cube. Hello? Yes. Yeah. Hello? It's a battery. So, okay. This is inside. This one is about, okay, so it's a cube. And it's a magic cube. And then how the ventilation is done, lighting is getting through, and how the details support the overall concept. Yeah. This is for a collection of our historical elements from our school. And also this public space for exhibition of students' work as well. That's the center, the atrium space. Now I want to show you some new project I designed, not executed yet. It's under now construction. It's a much larger project. So the test of ideas of identity in the countryside now come to the city. So it's the same thing. I think people ask me questions when I give lecture before. They said, okay, you do the smaller things in the countryside. It's easier to define identity. But what happens when you come to the city, right? Okay, this is what I understand about the identification of a city project. This is a school project. It's a high school. And the site is about 20,000 square meters. And the square meters for the project is 80,000 square meters. So the plot ratio is 4. And for a school project, the plot ratio as 4 is huge, right? Because you need sports facilities, and you need classrooms, and you need accommodations for this project as well. So the first line is very critical. How you design the project. But in this case, the first line is how I define the quantity, how I design the sports facilities together with the space together. Because we don't have the space to do it. Okay. And so this project is, location of the project is in Shenzhen. It's in the South China, close to Hong Kong. And it's a subtropical place. So which means we have 3 seasons of summer. So it's hot, right? So how to design this building accommodate the weather conditions and high densities and an education institute So all those are supposed to be addressed as an identity, as a totality, right? So this is what I did design. It's supposed to be porous, so the ventilation, and you're supposed to provide as much as outdoor space for the kids as possible. Because I realized that when the, high school children, when they come out of the classroom, they always want to go outside instead of stay, because they don't want to be claustrophobia. Yeah, so every class over, right away, go to outside. So we have actually double corridors outside, and garden space, outdoor space, as much as possible. And this is layer by layer. And no boundary. I don't want to set up boundary. So the boundary is like, you can see through, but you don't go through, right? So the boundary is like transparent. This is lowest level, and this is the podium, which provides actually double outdoor space. And then the running track is actually on the pilates, so you save space. And then building on top. This is the section. So there's no space. That's why you explore in three-dimensional way. This is the entrance. And the greeneries is to provide sun shading in a natural way. And in school project, you don't do very standardized project, but rather every now and then you provide some improvisations of things like this to represent ideas beyond the box. So we have swimming pool, we have the basketball field, we have tennis, we have gyms. So the sports facilities are divided into 16 units. So every student can enjoy at least 2 hours sports every day. There are altogether 2,000 students. This is now under construction. Hopefully by next year, we're going to have a physical thing coming out. And then this is a temple project, Buddhist temple. Is under construction again, and I always dreamed of designing something religiously attractive. And a Buddhist temple not normally, every Buddhist temple in China, you can imagine the beech roof, and then the burning the incense, and none of those temples actually translate or interpret what is Buddhist belief. Yeah? It's for people to pray. But for Buddha, his idea to teach his disciples is to let everyone to find their own Buddha inside their own body, not to pray for the Buddha, right? So in this project, I try to provide the environment that you can feel, you try to discover the Buddha inside yourself, instead of praying for Buddha. I won't go to details of this, but you can see whether you can. It's a modern building, very simple. And I try to set up a scenario after scenario in a very simple way with landscape, not with architecture. So architecture is kind of minimized into screens. So you don't see the object standing in nowhere, but rather you go through spaces after space. In the end, you have this. You don't feel it's a temple, right? So after this, that's the only statue, physical statue of Buddha in the whole temple. And after this, if you see the whole mountain, the whole natural setting expanded in front of you. So it's like discovery. Oh, this is the fashion headquarters of a fashion company. I won't go to details, but it's about the identity of a big corporate fashion company. Now, this is a factory I designed now. It's in the design process. And again, is try to give a new identity for a factory. You know that for factory buildings, normally it's a very it's about a function of manufacturing, right? But in this case, I try to define the identity of factory as a community, as a lifestyle. And this is the existing factory. So the factory bought a new piece of land here. So what I did now is to not just to enlarge the manufacturing part, but also to give a new identity by adding new things. This is the process. The factory moves from here to here, and then add up new things and change this one to the geometry of the, and add up a new facade, and we have this. So the people working here, not just to work from 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock. They feel they are in a community. They have a new lifestyle when you work here. And also it's a new facade, it's a new existence for the community nearby. So from this image, you see actually swimming pool, running track, the gardens for the kids. So the parents working here, the kids can be here in the kindergarten. And here is like experimental workshops for bakery, and there's a school of bakery as well. So the whole thing is a mix of functions. And it's not just for themselves, but also for the larger community in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Eu perguntava agora se alguém quer colocar alguma questão ao arquiteto Xiaodong. Por favor, não tenham qualquer inibição. Com certeza será muito bem-vinda a vossa pergunta. Mandarim.
You have a
It's amazing. No one ever asks question and we'll have one.
okay, question. Okay. Thank you.
So my question is, why do you think it's so important for you to incorporate nature in your projects?
Okay, I thank you very much for asking this question. Have you heard about the idea of the third ecology? Third ecology. Everyone knows what is third ecology? No. Okay. The first ecology is about we are part of nature. Yeah, it's many thousand years ago. We are still part of nature. And the second second ecology is about how we build the artificial environment that set ourselves apart from nature. That is we have been doing for the last thousands of years, right? Okay, now it's time to the idea of third ecology. The third ecology is about how we live up with nature intelligently. Yeah? Instead of separating ourselves from nature totally, we use air conditioning, we use very thick walls and things like that. But rather, can we live with nature in a more intelligent way? I think that is how we live sustainably with our resource, with our environments. And this is also the time to think about that way. Because, it's not healthy if you live totally with technology, with artificial environments, using air conditioning, right? And we have developed all kinds of technologies to separate the envelope here, inside, outside. Yeah? I think for the whole history of architecture is develop that. Before, there's no window, right? Tiny holes. And then we start to have glass, and then how to develop glass. Transparent, and then ventilation, and then double glazed, triple glazed, to protect yourself from outside, right? But we're not healthy if we're too artificially environmentalized. Then what is the idea of the third ecology is try to be part of nature again. And the natural setting you've seen just now, the two projects actually, one in the school and then the factory. You know, factory is very harsh, right? Very artificial, concrete, steel, glass, things so forth. But imagine, we had this experiments before in Netherlands when I studied there. We have experiments with the mouse living in two spaces. One is made of concrete, another one made of wood. With same food, so the mouse living in the wood environments lives 50% longer time than the one living in the concrete space. So which means we need to be more natural later in the future, instead of set up selves too separate from nature. So this is what I think. And also I was inspired by the Singaporean architects that cross ventilation, sun shading, instead of air conditioning everything. Do I answer my question correctly? Yeah? Third ecology. Yeah? Any more questions?
Há mais alguma pergunta?
Another miracle, another question.
First, I would like to thank you for the conference, and I would like to ask you how do you deal with gray energy, which I think after the consuming of the buildings, the energy consuming for heating and cooling, I think gray energy is a biggest goal to reach. How do you deal with that about architecture and ecology?
The energy, right?
The gray energy. Gray energy is the energy that every material you can use is.
The green energy. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, I think the third project I explained in my library is about green energy, because you don't use any power supply. Whatever you deal with actually is through design, through understanding of technology, not the technology itself, but rather the concept or ideas of technology. I think that is an important change of philosophy. So you don't just study what is technology in physical forms, but rather in its metaphysical forms. So blend the understanding of technology with design. I think that's about the green energy. So energy is not a separate entity of body, but rather it should be part of it.
My question actually was more about how. So you're talking about not using energy like electricity, for example.
As less as possible.
Exactly. That's bioclimatism in architecture, right? So my question is, I think this is one of the major questions we have to solve, and that's a great opportunity to have an example of this today. But I also think that we misregard the importance of gray energy in architecture. Maybe I wasn't clear. Gray energy is all the energy involved in the production of a material. And actually, glass, concrete, and steel are the biggest consumer of energy while being produced. So you're using wood, for example, but we know also that wood, laminated wood glued, is more consuming of energy than natural wood. That's just examples. I just wanted to know how do you deal with that specific reality of ecology in architecture?
So you mentioned about the material. I think that is very good point. And I just explained later just now about I use very small amount of concrete. And that is because energy you just mentioned. Steel, okay, steel, it costs energy to produce as well, but steel can be recycled after the building is finished, right? So I don't believe building should be permanent, and no building is permanent, right? It's not possible. So then you have to think about after the lifespan of the building is finished, what do you do with the remains of the project? So, well, steel can be recycled, timber can be recycled. You know, the library I designed, you can burn everything without a trace of anything to the environment. So I think using the right material and the right amount of material will be another way to understand about how reasonably, logically, you design your building. You're right, actually, the green energy is a big concept. Instead of directly using how much energy to heat up the building or cool down the building, but rather it's a whole cycle of ideas related to it. Yeah. Thank you.
Mais alguma pergunta?
First of all, thank you so much for the great conference. Also, I was thinking that after all of these years of building, trying to find your identity and clearly finding your own identity, do you feel that you're starting to influence the construction in China, or that somehow younger architects, Chinese architects, are starting to feel more aware of such identity, more Chinese than Western?
Well, now I give talks everywhere about identity. And I think the definition, the clearer as possible as you define the identity of the project, the more sustainable of community or society will be. Because the right definition of the identity is trying to define what is the most appropriate, what is the most situational ideas about a particular project. So it's not just about the culture, it's not just about environmental issues, it's about contemporary lifestyle defined in the most appropriate way. So I think more and more people will, well, at least I teach design in my studio, in my school, in that way. And hopefully my students understand also the architecture, what architecture is supposed to be in the 21st century in the future. You know, the design is a very dangerous fashion because we design the building a year, right? Construction 2 or 3 years. So after the building was finished, 4 years passed. It's not like a fashion, you design, you sell it tomorrow. But you design something 4 years later, it becomes obsolete if your idea is not even more future, right? So I think the idea, so what I understand design is like you stand in the point of view of the future and diagnose the problems of now and to define the lifestyle of the future. Yeah. So identity, I think, is critical.
Mais alguém quer fazer alguma pergunta?
Thank you for bearing with me. And I noticed that when you look at the screen, it's a very tiring problem with your neck, right?
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you,
for
thank
your
you, thank you.
lectures.